I was able to talk to a family member that I haven't been able to talk to in a while, and that was really good and really healthy, and I'm really happy with that. So let's see if I can make sure everything is set up to where I won't go blank. Because, I go blank enough in my own thought processes. I really don't need the cameras to go blank on top of it. So when we're looking at the Gravatian period, what we're looking at is a period from about 30,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago in Western, Southern Eurasia. This is not... Many people tend to look at, and I've had recent arguments with people over whether or not genealogy is a continued occupation of space when cultures shift through space, through time. So I want to first talk a little bit today about... We'll be working on Neanderthals soon. Have a good day at work and stay deadly. So when we're talking about the way that cultures are moving through time, we tend to think of cultures as a shift of genetics. So many people, I had somebody who was very certain that there were genetic peoples in Britain prior to the Celtic people, and that the Celtic people replaced the genetic people. Thank you, love you too. I appreciate that. That the Celts actually destroyed a people in a group that were in Britain beforehand and were colonizers. And when we look at cultures through the history of the British Isles, we can see... Is that the best wording for that, Sleepy? Is it British Isles is the best wording if I'm talking about both Ireland and Britain? I do not. I know that there's I want to make sure. When we're looking at those two spaces and the occupation on those two spaces, we show genetic continuity from the oldest find on those two spaces to what is currently in those two spaces now. We do not show cultural fluidity, the UK and the Republic for the land masses, not the countries, but the land masses. Because I know that you've stated before that Britain is technically the landmass for that island, or the name for that island. Or is it a continent? I don't think it's big enough to be a continent, to be honest. Okay. So then I'll do it differently. Okay, so the continent of Britain and the continent of Ireland. If that works the best, let me know. When we look at those two land masses, the genetic continuity is there, but the cultural continuity might not be. And so the argument was whether or not the Celts were the descendants of the original genetic inhabitants of that space. Yes, I is back. Make sure and grab this account if you don't already. But yes, it's back. So when you're looking at the genetic continuity, we can see that goes by, but the cultural continuity does not. My dog is very licky and very attention-seeking today. And what I mean by this is that when we look at the oldest archaeological find that we have on the island of Britain, that we have DNA evidence for, we're looking at Chatterman. We have two older archaeological humans that we have found, Homo sapiens, that we have found on that land mass within the last year. The dog. You need to settle. I know I'm talking, but I still need you to settle. Do you think you can settle? He's old, and he is his mother's child, as far as he's concerned. I'm his guardian and caretaker, and I owe him, as far as he is concerned. So he doesn't like to sit down, right? But I'm specifically talking about the islands, so not just the peoples, because the genetic continuity is going to be different. And when I'm talking about the Gravatians, I'm not talking about the islands, but when I'm you'll understand in a second. So when I'm looking at the oldest archaeological find that we have in the island of Britain, the oldest archaeological find of a Homo sapien, not of other species like Homo neanderthalis or Homo heidelbergensis, which are both found. Um, when I'm looking at that, I can see that Cheddar Man, who is the oldest that we currently have DNA for, is a direct 300 generation ancestor of a person who currently lives a mile away from where Cheddar Man's body was found. So this shows that there is genetic continuity from our oldest find to today within the island of Britain. Jay woke up. I was talking. I'm loud if you haven't noticed. So the oldest in the island of Britain being Cheddar Man that we have DNA for, because we have found two more Homo sapiens there recently, one at 14,000 years ago and one at 13,000 years ago, if my memory serves correct on the dating. 14 and 15, not 13. And when we look at those two finds, we're looking at finds that I have not seen genetic DNA evidence coming through on any platforms yet. That does not mean that they haven't gotten DNA from them. It means that if it has been processed and put into a paper, which takes some time, I have not found the papers on them yet. So currently, the oldest sapien that we find in the island of Britain is a direct antecessor of 300 generations to a man who lives a mile from where he was found. That would be Cheddar Man, and I do not know the name of the current Celt Brit that is there, though I do know that the face that we have, the reconstruction of, that all of us thinks looks like Ragnar from the show Vikings, that face actually looks similar to the face of the direct descendant that is there. Now, when we talk about Cheddar Man, when we talk about the Durenberg woman, the Bad Durenberg shaman, Bad Durenberg shaman, and when we talk about the finds that we have in the entirety of Western Eurasia during that time. Oh, is it Mr. Target? Ha ha ha! Nice. So I didn't know that we knew the name. I thought that they were withholding that. I'm so glad to know that. That makes me happy. Anyway, so cousins. I has cousins. So when we're looking at people during this time period have dark skin. In specific, when we're looking at Cheddar Man, the alleles for his skin, there's roughly 9 different alleles that are present in our body that compile the amount of melanin that we're going to have in our skin. And this gives the perception that other people give of darker or lighter skin tones. The alleles are the same alleles as is described as sub-Saharan when the alleles are being typed. Named, right? Bad Durenberg is the name of the town where they were found. And there are 2 articles on the website that I have underneath the bibliographies, and one of them is an archaeology.org website, and it goes pretty in depth. And then another one is a where's the other site? Landesmuseum. So it's a Nordic one. It is translated though. The website is the widdaord.com, and it's underneath the bibliographies tab, and then it'll say Bad Durenberg. But it is the name of the town. And so I was like, what is the significance? But I haven't found any significance other than the town name. When what we're looking at is groups of people who are darker skin. They say that Otzi is probably skin tone wise that we would think of as I think the correct terminology, and I want to make sure, is Middle Eastern, and it might be that Middle Eastern is not the correct terminology, and if I'm incorrect in that, let me know. But it is brown, what we would define as brown, even though black is brown and white is brown, but in the mid shade, right? So when we're looking at how we see the translation of skin tone coming down, we're definitely seeing that we're looking at much darker at 10,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago, and then still pretty dark at 5,000 years ago. When we're looking at hair, Bad Dürrenberg shaman, they actually defined the texture of her hair as well, and they state that her hair is straight. It is black, it is straight, and her eyes are blue. When we're talking about Cheddarman, to what I have seen, they haven't actually given the texture, so I'm not exactly sure what his texture was, but it is dark black hair and it is blue of eyes for Cheddarman. Now, the only reason that I'm talking about these things is because I want you to understand the genetic descents, right? So when we look at the island of Britain itself, what we have seen with cultural descent across the island of Britain, and I do not know every single culture. There are, Bronze Age, there are Iron Age, and it goes along and along. But we can not, but most people would know of the Bell Beaker culture and the Celtic culture. So these are two separate cultural phenomenons among the same genetic groups of people. You can see that the genetics from the Bell Beakers is the same as those in the area, whereas from the genetics from the Bell Beakers in the island of Britain, the Bell Beaker culture in the island of Britain consists of people who are genetically connected back to Cheddarman and forward to people who are currently there. They are of the same line of descent. You move from Bell Beaker to Celt, and you're looking at the same line of descent. When you're looking at differences in culture, you are not looking at differences in genetics. This does not mean all the time. There is, as we've talked about in this before, a constant fluctuation and a constant movement. And so you might have a group where so if we're going to look at recent studies have indicated that there are some actual Celtic groups that were not matrilineal, they were patrilineal. What we're looking at when we look at how lineage is established is we're looking at the mitochondrial DNA and the Y DNA. If a community's mitochondrial DNA stays the same, but their Y DNA has an influx or changes, like maybe, and these are not the numbers for the letters for Y DNA, okay, but um, if the Y DNA is A and J and K, and then you get an influx of M or an influx of B, which are not the numbers for Y DNA, or the letters for Y DNA, you're going to see that the men are coming in. If the mitochondrial DNA is M and L and M and Q, and I think Q is actually a Y, and X, which are actual mitochondrial DNAs, if they stay the same, then this means that the women are staying with the land and the new genetics incoming are the men. Now, we've talked in here before about the fact that incest is a problem. Incest in any species causes genetic abnormalities, right? And because incest in any species causes genetic abnormalities, every species kind of knows this, unless we've fucked with them enough like house cats, right? Every species kind of knows that incest is not helpful for the genetic continuity of a species. And so every species will seek outside genetics. And in the seeking of outside genetics, for Homo sapien, we go to, in cultures that have a descent by biology, we go to having one group coming from outside to supply the new genes, while another group stays with the land. So, in a group that is matrilineal descent, you're going to find that the mitochondrial DNA stays roughly the same. Now, what does this mean? When we talk about how we get the X chromosome versus the Y chromosome passes down intact to the next generation of male. The Y chromosome is only seen in male. There is only ever one Y chromosome. The X chromosome is seen in both male and female, and the X chromosome, it starts in pairs, right? It's given in pairs, basically. And because of the fact that as it's given, it's a pair thing, kind of, I guess. Maybe that's just wrong. The X chromosome never goes directly down. That's just the way it goes. So if If somebody is female, they have two X chromosomes, and the two X chromosomes, one they inherit from their mother and one they inherit from their father. The X chromosome that they inherit from their father, who has a Y chromosome and an X chromosome, is the X chromosome that this son inherited from his mother. How the mother gives the X chromosome is she takes the two X chromosomes that she has, the one from the father and the one that she received from her mother, and she combines them. She just shoves them together and pulls out of this and pulls out of that and pulls out of this and pulls out of that. You might find that there's 10% more of the male X, or the chromosome that came from the father, the X chromosome that came from the father, and there's 90% of the chromosome that came from the mother. You might find that there's 50-50 of the chromosome that comes from the father and the chromosome that comes from the mother. And oh, we do. I believe, and we've talked about this, I believe that you have Cheddarman in you, and I have Cheddarman. And then I don't have a whole lot over there. But yeah, I'm pretty sure. Because if I trace it back far enough, a lot, I think we talked about this when we talked about the Celtic nations in common, because we were talking about where the Duma. I can see half of the words, so I'm not going to be able to say the whole word. But I think it's the Dumani Celts are from Eastern Wales, so our Eastern communities. So they would be. I think we talked about a little bit with that, so I'm pretty sure we do. When we're looking at the way that the X comes down, because it comes down in a combination, and because each combination is a combination, that's where you can get a new mitochondrial Eve, basically. And so when we see this, we can track whether or not you're seeing the male or the female lineage coming from outside. There is always a lineage coming from outside, though, right? The reason, again, being from that is that outside lineage keeps the people from being too pure. Being too pure is a bad thing. It is genetically negative to be too pure. So, well, you can see that and I believe even with Cheddarman, it is the mitochondrial chromosome, the X chromosome within him that is, because I believe it is a chromosome that is related with like the chromosome, the mitochondrial X for that, like it's 13% of Northwest Europeans or something like that. The have the same mitochondrial chromosome or something along those lines. I'd have to read it again to be able to enunciate it correctly. So you can see where the one group staying in and one group coming in means that the group staying in is showing a direct lineage down. Okay. And as Damani, as it's going down, it is meaning that the descendants are direct descendants. Now, whether or not you're direct matriarchal descendants or direct patriarchal descendants is going to depend. This is a lot, I think, for just understand that it's always pretty much the same genetics, but there's always going to be an influx to keep everything lively and diverse, yet much of it will remain the same. And a lot of times, like, okay, so, if you have the son born to, an outside man and an inside woman, he's going to be passing down some of these genetics, right? I'll pull it up. We'll talk about it later. I'll pull it up because I can kind of half picture the map in it, and I don't think it's as high as Kenwick, so it must be something else. Because it was down like in the east or the southern part, and then over when I can see it on the map, and I'll have to look it up. But when we look at the way those trace, it states and shows continuity of genetics. It shows a difference in gender, or not gender, in culture as we go down. Oh, it shows a different in gender. It shows a different in culture. Is it really? I thought it was in the north. Listen. I have stated several times, shit at geography. I can't even tell you. I think Salem is the capital of the state that I live in currently. Olympia is the capital of the state I was born in, but I would not have been able to tell you where Olympia was until I was 30. Geographically, I'm challenged. You can try. I will inform you that many people have tried to update my geography thought process. It does not work very well. Does not work. I probably have better geographical pictures in my mind of geography more than a couple of thousand years ago than I do pictures in my mind of geography today. Like I can, if you were to pull up a map, I could point on the map where the three groups of Bell Beaker people are, but I could not tell you as we speak the countries that they resided in. I believe you have a big whiteboard that you should pull that out for your lives, actually. You should pull out a big whiteboard and teach. I think that'd be good. So I can point it out on a map. If you drew the map on the board, I could point out exactly where I'm talking about, but I could not talk out. But yeah, no, okay, now that I see, and it wasn't, I'll pull it up still later and go over the name. Yeah, ancient land occupied to modern. I don't think I want to see that though. Like, I don't want to see like the picture on the map where we go from this thought process to this thought process and form borders and how different thought processes kind of go back. So I don't think that I could mentally be. I'll just keep it in my mind, the ancient ones, because I like the ancient borders that weren't borders. They make me happier. I will try and give some thought process to where the modern borders are. So with the Gravachians, which is the guy on the wall behind, like the earliest finds in Britain, like the earliest finds in Sweden and Norway, like the earliest finds in Latvia. I do know the names of those countries and I can picture those kind of sort of, but not different. Anyway, so as we watch the genetics shift forward, the genetics remain continual. The ancient genetics continue on within those spaces. Whether those ancient genetics continue on in those spaces through both lines or through one line or through another line shifts up with every space. Sometimes you'll see, like with the Gravachians, there are three spaces that the Gravachians their culture was found, and this includes the Iberian Peninsula, about midway between the Italian Peninsula and the Iberian Peninsula. And I was trying to think of the name of that space, and I'm not quite sure if it's Spain or if it's something else. It might be Greece, but Greece might be over here, and the top of the Italian Peninsula. So when we're looking at those three spaces of Gravachians, there are three genetically distinct groups. And as they move back down during the Younger Dryas, which is like a 1300 period where it snaps and cold and people are moving out of the northern regions. It's at the end of the last ice age really starts like melting the upper half of Western Eurasia around 40,000 years ago. So it wasn't the Ender drop. Yeah, wrong timeline. Sorry. So as the Gravachians move up into the space, and as the ice is fluctuating, they move back down. And as they move back down, the group that's at the top of the Italian Peninsula, when it goes back up later on, so this is roughly 30,000 years ago, as that last receding happens, right? As they go back up, they take a different Y DNA with them. The Y DNA in the community has been replaced. Now, what this signifies for many anthropologists or archaeologists for this time period is that what happened is the Y DNA in that group died out, basically. and was replaced by an incoming Y DNA. Now, there are different ways that this can happen. You can have men who are no longer fertile, and so they're no longer having children due to something happening. There are several periods that we have seen with other human species as well, like the Neanderthals and Homo heidelbergensis, where a near extinction event has caused them to shrink down and go from a large amount to, I think with heidelbergensis, they're stating it was like 1,800 people, right? So going down to a very small percent of people, which means that they would need other Y or mitochondrial DNA, which we would absolutely see within the Neanderthals, to actually continue on as a species, which is a contributing factor into why Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are mixing, right? The Neanderthals and Denisovans are mixing. So that can happen on a species level, but it can also happen on a community level. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you're not following this account, everybody make sure that you follow this account. The other account is unable to be live on anymore, and so make sure you follow this account. When the when this happens, it can happen not just on a species level, but it can happen on a communal level. And when it's happening on a communal level, what you're going to see is that it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire community is going through a kind of near extinction event where they're, the whole community is shrinking. It can just mean that the genetic group that is absent now and has to be replaced has started shrinking. That can be due to genetics. It can also be due to environmental factors. It can also be due to factors of violence. Of course, this is a time period that we do not see factors of violence really entering into the archaeological records. So I would not state personally that it is factors of violence. I would state because of the movement down to the Mediterranean and then back up, and that new Y DNA coming in down to the movement of the Mediterranean. I'd say that, if you've got a group of 50 people, I think that the Gravatians are estimated to be more than that considerably. I think they're, like a few thousand. But if you've got a group of a few thousand people, if you got a group of 1,000 people, let's say, and you, 51% of your group is female and 50% is group is male, and you spend 3 or 4,000 years in a new space, and the girls like the guys next door instead of you and your brother, that your DNA is going to no longer be present within the community due to species selection, incels, so it might be something into which the Y DNA that was within the community before is no longer the chosen Y DNA to have babies with, because this Y DNA looks better. This Y DNA over here might be better suited to the area too. If we've been living in, middle Western Europe for a minute, and then we're pushed down and it's the Mediterranean, this guy over here might know where the great flint spot is, and he might know where the good hunting spot is. And, so he might bring more to the table. He might be a fitter mate than the dude that came with me down from the northern regions. So of the 3 groups, though, we only have one that replaces its Y DNA as it moves back up. So again, the Gravatians are a 10,000 year period, and this is roughly, I want to say, towards the end of that 10,000 year period. So, mid 30 something thousand years ago. But I cannot remember exactly on the date on it. And is when they're coming down and then they're going back up. And they spend a couple thousand years down before they go up, to my memory of the articles on it, or memory of the papers on it. So when this is happening as they're going back up, all 3 are still also carrying some of the primary, or not some of the primary genetics, but like the group that's Y DNA has been replaced, the mitochondrial DNA is still the same mitochondrial DNA, right? So you're seeing that they're the same group of people moving back up. They're still the same genetic group of people that is moving back up. When you're looking at the 2 groups that don't have any replacement of mitochondrial or Y DNA within their communities, you're looking at the same genetic distinctions moving back up, right? So as we look at that, we need to understand again that the culture is the thing that is changing. The thought processes, the curiosity, the interaction, the way that we live due to the environment that we live in is what is changing. But we, as in my grandmother and my grandchild, is not changing. Okay. You see again, if you have a matrilineal or a patrilineal group, that the matrilineal line or matrial lines or the patrial lines might come from other communities because diversity is best. Purity is bad. The more pure you get, the more genetically mutated you get. So we should not be going for purity. Um, the Gervasian period ending at 30,000 years ago then moves on into the other periods of culture. When we look at the Bell Beakers, which are several thousand years later, we can see genetic similarities showing genetic continuity with Gervasians who have made it to the same areas that you see the Bell Beakers within. So there are distinct groups of three distinct genetic groups that are named Bell Beaker because of the Bell Beaker culture that the three different groups communities followed. So you have one in the northern part, Latvian kind of area of Western Eurasia. You have one in Britain, and you have one in uh, it's like right above to the east, I think, of the Iberian Peninsula. I can't name the exact space down along there. I just know it's down along there. Which has genetic distinct ties with the Gervasians of that region as well. So again, we're seeing that this is a continuity of genetics and a revitalization, change, growth, benefit of culture. We've talked in here a few times about the fact that everything you have today is built on the science of Homo erectus. Homo erectus' ability to create fire, and I found the date on that 1.5 million years ago. Homo erectus' ability to create fire at 1.5 million years ago is the reason that you have a cell phone today. If Homo erectus did not have the ability to understand how to control fire through the usage of scientific reasoning, then you would not have a cell phone today. So every single morph of culture, every single movement of thought process of culture is growth. It is a step. What we consider forward, I don't always consider it forward. I don't consider this better than shit here 1,000 years ago, right? I do know that most people do consider this to be a better space. I may not, but so everything forward, right? Every movement that we're taking forward is built on the steps of those who have come before. And as every movement we're taking forward is built on the steps of those who come before, that shift in cultural change does not indicate a shift of genetic change, right? So when we're looking at the way the Bell Beakers are moving in this space and the interactions that we're seeing with the Bell Beakers, the Gervasians, we can see how some of those thought processes will translate down later. And we can see how the connection to the land is shifting as they're moving through this land. Now, the Gervasians, being the descendants of the Eurasians, which I never can pronounce correctly, are the descendants of the first who come in by 10,000 years. They're the first to live in a space that we currently believe all the Neanderthals as whole species genome is gone. This does not mean that those who appear to be Neanderthal, those who carry a lot of Neanderthal genetics are all gone. It does mean that anybody that we look at as a whole genome of Neanderthal, only Neanderthal and their genetics is gone. We see that the last of what we think of as the Neanderthals being in the area is about 40,000 years ago. There is indication in, I think, a couple regions more to the east where Neanderthals are seen to 30,000 years ago. There's also Denisovan in that space as well. So as we are looking at the rise of this period of culture, what we're looking at in our identifiers of culture are the goddesses that you see. The goddess of Willendorf, the goddess of Brasomfi, the goddesses that you see that have the head of the goddess in this kind of checkerboard pattern. This checkerboard pattern has been thought of or suppositioned to be a couple of different things by archaeology and anthropology. When archaeology looks at this checkerboard pattern, when anthropology looks at this checkerboard pattern, the couple of things that they can grab some knowledge for is the idea of either what we're seeing here, which is a headdress made out of shells, or braids. Some of the checkerboard patterns look very much like braids, yet you can also see where they could be shells. The Venus of Brasomfi is one of those. The checkerboard pattern actually looks like it's hair, like it's like this, right? And it hangs down to about here. And it looks like it could be long braids in her hair, yet it also could be an indicator of some form of a shell work headdress. The uh, Venus of Willendorf, to me, I would say looks more like a shell headdress, and this is because it seems to come down over their forehead. There is a recent one, that one's in my phone, that I've seen that I'm going to put up on the website. I just haven't gotten it yet. That is like the head is like a column almost, and it's the top of the head and down the back of the head. So, it could be either or, right? Again, we are going to look at 40,000 to 30,000 years ago. We know that we're looking at people who are dark of skin and dark of hair. At 9,000 years ago, we have archaeological evidence of somebody who has a dark skin and dark hair that's straight. It is not as likely at 40,000 years ago that you're going to have the adaptation to get to straight hair having taken effect in a majority of populations. So you're probably still looking at the tightly coiled hair. And again, when we've talked before in here, we've talked about the fact that the tightly coiled hair is indicative of, not indicative of, there have been studies done by black black anthropologists who have specialty with hair as well, who have done studies that have shown that the reason that we as a species speciate with tightly coiled hair is because in speciating in Africa, where we do speciate at, tightly coiled hair will protect your skull, basically. It creates almost like a hat-like barrier, and then it creates a lattice work for air to flow through. And just like Neanderthals speciating in Europe speciate with a nostril and sinus cavity that allows air to warm before it reaches the brain, allowing the air to cool as it passes over the skull means your brain doesn't boil, and we don't like boily brains. So when we look at this, we can see that it's unlikely that we've reached a point that we have straighter hair at this point. So it could absolutely be a tight braid or a braid cap, right? So I think that it could go either anyway. We do see this in all of the Venus statues that we have, though, all of the goddess statues that we have. There is different thought processes to why, right? The different thought processes to why we see this in the Venus statues is there is an idea that this indicates a goddess, like a goddess of abundance, There's also a thought process that this could be a cap that signifies rank or station. And this could actually signify being a midwife, being somebody who works in a fertility rank and station within the community. And so the cap signifies. We also have during this period of time our first anamorphic statue. This is the period of time in which we get our first statues. We go from painting things on cave walls to creating statues of things during this time period. When we start seeing our first statues, actually older than the Venuses and found in the last couple of years, is a lion-headed man. This lion-headed man is not too big, and its head is a lion's face, and it kind of looks like it manes, and then it's a male body with what looks like stripings on the arm, which could indicate either tattoo work, which we do find tattooing at 37,000 years ago. We find tools for tattooing in a cave in France. So this is something that could be tattooing, or it is something that could indicate like scars on the body, lion head, and I think it's like 5 marks across. Lion head, maybe these are claw marks. So it's something that could indicate a couple of different things. It could also be indicative of a ranking and position, right? The lion head might be something, yeah, it could be scarification as well. That's kind of what I wonder with the bad Durenberg shaman, is if the tools, because they're microlith blades that are an inch long, might actually be uh, so it looks to me like some form of skin modification. So it could be a scarification, but because of the fact, not but because, and with the fact that we can see that they have the ochre tools and the tools for grinding ochre and applying ochre to the skin, that it might actually be scarification with color, which would kind of put it in that tattooing realm as well. So, with, of course, that's 20, 30,000 years after the lion statue, lion-headed man, but scarification. Or, I mean, if I'm a hunter and I go out and I kill a mountain lion with my bare hand, I probably am the baddest ass hunter, you know. And so if I wear that mountain lion on my head around and make sure everybody knows that I am the baddest ass hunter you've ever fucking met, I'm bad man, right? I might have gotten a little bit of scars, like, so it could also be actual like scars happening in the interaction that got him the mountain lion head. Um, then again, we don't know. I mean, does he have the mountain lion head because he personally went out? Yes. Did I say okra? I probably did. I've been doing better about that, but I do verbally confuse those two words a lot. But yes, ochre, like the red dye. Thank you for the correction if I did say okra. So when we look at this, we can look at this as, is this actually the head of a lion that he went out and hunted and killed, and now he's displaying the trophy from his kill? Or is he an elder who has been respected enough to be given a position where he, he was a great hunter during life, and now he's the protector of our people, right? Thank you. Always, always. Thank you for being that person and me knowing you're that person. So, it could be either or it could be that anybody who was a hunting leader wore a lion's head and was marked with scarification or paint on their, or tattooing on their arms. So they knew that this person was this. So if we're thinking of the idea that the Venus's headdresses are indicative of a position within community, then it would make sense that the lion-headed man is indicative of a position within community as well, like a representative of somebody within community. And so, it might be that we knew who our midwives were because they wore a headdress that indicated that they were midwives, and we knew who our great hunters were because they wore a headdress that indicated that they could kick it out of a mountain lion anytime they tried, right? So I kind of think for me that it has more to do with position than anything else. I think that that's my take on it, with the different thought processes that I have. I can see, other takes, but for me, I think it's, I want to make sure that I state, though, that I do not believe that the positions are positions, as in positions of power, right? I don't think we're looking at like chieftains and heads of the nation or things like that. I think what we're looking at, um, throughout history, we've had, and prehistory, we've had academic classes within our groups of humans, right? Throughout history and prehistory, we have had those who are the scientists, those who are the healers, those who teach, those who commune with the gods. These are our academic classes within any culture. These are those who are their job, their participation in community is less physical and more mental, I guess, or they're the ones somebody else has to feed, I guess, is the bluntest way I can put it, right? We're looking at the people who are spending all of their time devoted to a thought process. Many times it is an activity, like if you're healing or teaching, right? But to a thought process that does not involve gaining food. For me, when I talk about, I believe that civilization starts, a civilized society, a civilized space starts when we have um, an abundance of food that means that nobody is going without, right? That to me is where we see a start of civilization, because when you have an abundance of food, that means that nobody is going without, instead of just an abundance of food that you're hoarding, and nobody is going without. It means that people can devote time and energy to building cities and understanding architecture, to medicine, to teaching, to keeping histories. When you have the ability to make sure that everybody has enough to eat, no matter what occupation they're doing, then you have the ability for other occupations other than the occupation of finding nutrients, right? So to me, I kind of think of it as our academic class. We have the people who are not devoting their time to the finding of nutrients because, as a community, this civilization has started and they have the ability to devote that time to other things so that they can build the communal whole, while other people are out hunting and tending so that they can build the communal whole, right? This is why it's important to me that we look at seeking of knowledge, that you want to see. What is your talents? What do you bring to the table? What is it that you enjoy, that you're good at, that you're talented at? These are the things that you should be bringing for a community, right? So when we're looking at these positions, it is important to me that I do not see them as positions of power. I see them as positions of um, give to community, of what you are bringing to the community, so everybody is aware that the gift that you're bringing is there, right? When that gift that you are bringing um, is as much about the knowing, and this can be the knowing how, like a hunting leader is more about the knowing how to make sure that all the needs for the hunting are met, right? Or the knowing how to heal or help give birth, right? um, we also see within this culture burials of grave goods, um, and it kind of more not like elaborate burials of grave goods, but graves being buried with things to take with you into the afterlife to ensure you have an afterlife. um, it's been a hot minute since I've talked about the gravations, so I'm trying to, and they're not as one I know as well as some of the others like Neanderthals and Homo erectus. So I want to pause for a second and think and make sure that I'm getting thought processes. I have in my website, underneath the bibliographies, um, European ancestors, and the European ancestors includes the Gravatian period. So let me see if I can make sure that I'm getting all the different concepts that I need to. It's not working. Sucks. Apparently, I need to edit the website a little bit as well. So I know that we have things that indicate a more extensive burial. And what I mean by that is a more extensive concept of taking things with you into the afterlife, right? A burial that includes goods that you're going to be able to utilize in the next time. And I also know that we're looking at a specific change in the way that the tools are used, the stone tools that we see used. Uh, I also know that during this time period is when we're seeing, and I want to try and think exactly. No, because I can't remember the exact on where and who on that one. Um, we do know, though, that we are seeing tailored clothing starting during this time period. Have a great one, Zulma. Um, we are seeing tailored clothing starting during this time period in this space. Um, Tailored clothing is uh, there's a find of a hip bone that has evidence of being used to do all work. I can't remember if it's Neanderthals. I know it's like 40,000 years ago, and I can't remember if it's Neanderthal or if it's in a different space in the Gravatians, and so I'm not exactly sure. But I do know that we see during this time that tailored clothing is happening within the Gravatians, and that we do see that tailored clothing is happening within others. Now, of course, tailored clothing does not mean like you take it down to your tailor and it fits you perfectly. What it means is that it's no longer a skin that you've cut a hole in, tossed over your head, and tied around your body. Um, yes, the ability to actually sew clothing that actually fits our body, like has armholes and a side here, goes back to 40,000 years, at least. There is some evidence of others. I just can't remember off the top of my head, but not too much further back, right? I always love that one. The Celts wore trousers, and the Romans called the Celts savages because they wore dresses. Because the Romans did wear long tunics. We tend to think of Romans in the toga, but the toga is actually a part of. Uh, it's a regalia almost. It's like a ceremonial thing. It's a part of being a part of the Senate and stuff like that. And or it's indicative of class, indicative of class. And they actually wore a tunic underneath and then had the toga that they would put around them. Um, but they did not wear pants. They did not wear underwear either. And they thought that those who wore pants were horrifically savage and horrifically not good, right? Because why would you cover your balls? So we do see that it goes back that far. We see that the movement of culture through with the continuity goes down into the next generation of culture at roughly 30,000 years ago. We start to see actually our first evidences recently discovered of writing at 27,000 years ago in Gravatian areas, or in the areas that the Gravatians were in prior. So we do see that within this continuity and this continuity of knowledge, that while material culture may shift and may change, the shifting of material culture is a continuity. It forms its own genetic, really. So like when we look at the fact that we can trace the genetic of somebody in a space back to the Gravatians, right? Because if I can trace it back to the Bell Beakers in a space, then I can trace it back to, and the Bell Beaker DNA is similar to the Gravatian DNA, or within the same family as the Gravatian DNA, I can trace it back. So we know we can, Spain, say, we can trace this back 40,000 years for the genetic continuity. We can also see that the continuity of culture has its own genealogy. So when we're looking at the Bell Beakers, we know that the Bell Beakers are three different genetics in three different spaces, right? To my knowledge, I do not believe that we have found where the earliest is, though there's a part of me that wants to state that the earliest is the one in the northern portion. I cannot remember exactly, so I cannot state that we have found the earliest. If we are going with the idea that we have an earliest, and I'm going to, because I can't remember if it's this or not, going to state, let's say that the earliest is in Spain. If we state that the earliest is within Spain that we found, then this shows a genetic continuity of the culture, as you see that the Bell Beaker culture is translated up to the northern portion, the Latvian portion, and then also translated out to the British Isle, or to the Isle of Britain, right? So as we're seeing that, that is most likely, because again, we are at this time still talking to each other, still cross-cultural, right? Most likely the translation of evidence, or not evidence, of material culture is, I'm down here in Spain and I make this bell beaker and we're all like, ooh, well, that's a pretty cool little pottery piece you got there. I like how you did that. Let's make more. Okay, we're going to take this more and we're going to trade it up north. Ha ha, let's go trade it up north. So I take this and I trade it up north. And North goes, ooh, that's a pretty cool little piece of pottery you have there. I'll trade you thousands of furs for thousands of pieces of your pottery. Or will you teach me how to make this pottery, and then I'll make this pottery. Okay, has Bell Beaker here, has Bell Beaker here. Bell Beaker here, come from Bell Beaker here. Bell Beaker here goes, ooh, pottery, and goes, I'll here. What do you think? Like my pottery? And they go, ooh, pottery. Yes. Okay, we take this pottery, right? Yes, and it is. It is. So, and that's so you can have that trade as, let me give you 1,000 furs for thousands of pieces of Bell Beaker pottery, or you can have that trade as how to do. Teach me, please. I will give you knowledge and you will give me knowledge, right? So you can see that the translation of material culture can oftentimes also be traced back in an almost familial line of that material culture. And you can see the addition of individual artistry. So in something like that, I mean, the way I would picture honestly is like, I have made my bell beaker and I take up like 30, 40 bell beakers to guy up in the north. And I say, hey, you like my bell beakers? He's like, yeah, I like your bell beakers. How'd you make those bell beakers? I'll show you how I make these bell beakers, but you trade me these bell beakers for that. And then I show you, right? And then you have the 30. So the very first of the bell beaker in this space is going to be the same as the bell beaker down here. But as it continues along, it gets more information, more individualistic style from the individualistic space that it's in, right? But you can still trace it back. Like, does it resemble this? Does it come back to this? You can see that, again, that continuity of material culture, or the genetic kind of line of material culture, again, doesn't mean that the genetic line in the space, that the actual my grandmother, my grandchild line is changing within a space. But you can trace where, and it is this trace of where you can see cultures being given, understood, interacted with, right? That you can see how people are actually constantly in a movement, that there is this constant flux, that there is this constant highway being traveled upon. There are constant pathways, there are constant roads, there are constant beats of feet across land to give new information. This, I think, for me is so important because we like to think of ourselves as having been isolated during specific periods of time. And yet we've never been isolated. We weren't even isolated in the creation of our species. We've never been isolated. I do have to leave in a few minutes so that I can go to my appointment. So let me go ahead and finish up here. And then I'll be back. I'm hoping this evening. I'm not exactly sure when. But I'm hoping this evening. If not, because it's Jay's night off, I'll be back tomorrow. So we've talked in here before, though not on this, well, yes, on this account, though not in detail on this account. We've talked in here before, though, about the fact that as a species, we are biologically nurturing and communal. We have 5 life stages from neonate to adult. It's the most of any species. Neanderthal have 4 life stages. They're the next closest to us. These extended life stages are stages of malleability of our brain, of growth of our brain from our first birth, first breath, right? From the moment we're born until the moment our brain fully forms at 25 years currently, though that was earlier before. So these 5 life stages increase the malleability of our brain. And this increasing of the malleability of our brain is why we are the creatures that we are, why we think we're so smart. It's why we think that we're the greatest. This increasing of our malleability of our brain, though, requires that we are taken care of during these extended periods of time. Many animals are born and slither or walk, or, some animals are born, they never even see their mother, right? So many animals are born, many parts of the globe are born with not a long childhood. They don't have, because of the way life stages work. So, like, we monitor these things in ancient finds or in fossil finds through teeth placement. And you can see as the teeth are dropping, and then you can see the striations on the teeth to see how what stage of life, right? And how long each stage of life takes. But if you're looking at like 40,000 years ago, from infancy to full brain closure, if our entire lifespan is not always shorter, but it is somewhat shorter, right? If our entire lifespan is somewhat shorter, then our maturity, our mental maturity is going to be earlier. So I don't have exact years of what full brain closure would be 40,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. I do know that, we're looking at, if I was pulling thought processes out from what I do know, that we're looking at probably, if we're looking at 40,000 years ago, you're probably getting full brain development in your late teens. And if you're looking earlier than that, it would definitely be your late teens, if not mid-teens. And this is only because if you look at like sexual maturity within bodies at an earlier age, as we go 40,000, 100,000 years ago, not 2,000 years ago, but as we're going far back, right? But for the last several thousand years, yes, it has definitely taken the 25 years to mature. It's just as we go way back, right? When we're not living, I think we have been able to live to 100, for thousands of years. Very frequently, we see that the oldest that we're seeing, 30, 40,000 years ago was going to be like 50, 60, things like that. That doesn't mean that people, like, just because I found somebody that's 60,000 years old and I haven't, or 60 years old, 60 years old, and I haven't found somebody who was 75 years old, doesn't mean that people didn't live to 75. It just means that that body wasn't found by the archaeologists. So, it's not something where we can say like there is a max age or an average life expectancy. We do tend to believe that the average life expectancy was less. And so you would reach mental maturity at an earlier stage, right? Like if you're only living 50 years, everybody's only living 50 years, waiting until you're mid-age to reach full mental maturity isn't necessarily going to continue the, especially if, like you have to be 25 to reach full mental maturity. You're only going to get another 25 years after that. So you're not having a baby. Like if you're having sexual maturity at the same age and you're, not having a baby until 25, and then you're dead by the time that they are a parent, right? So you see that those maturity levels are going to be less depending on the life expectancy. But currently it is 25 years. And each of those stages is about developing the malleability of our brain so that we have intelligence that we have. This takes nurturing. We must nurture our children. And it takes many, many people to nurture a child, especially in prior times, even today, though. Even if you are a single parent in today's society in the United States, it still takes several different people to provide nurturing for your child. It takes a school teacher, it takes a daycare worker, it takes somebody else who is watching your child while you go to work, right? Um, it takes I hate to say it, it takes the boss who's paying you the wage, right? They are through extended community nurturing your child because they're providing this so that you can provide this. It takes the grocery store worker who is at the checkout counter and the grocery store worker that stocked the shelves and the person that drove it from the farm to there and the farmer. All of these things are providing nurture to a child. Um, of course, that one person that there's is there 24/7 and it's extremely difficult, is definitely providing the most nurture, right? Yet all of those parties play a part in the nurture of the child even today. So if you go back 40,000 years ago, it takes roughly 30 people in a community at minimum to be able to provide nurture from neonate to adult for a child. You're not going to have your children every year. You might have your children every 5 years. And I don't mean one woman might have her child every 5 years. I mean, your community might have a child every 5 years so that you're not having 10 toddlers running around that you all have to keep an eye on. Otherwise, those 10 toddlers, you're going to die. Sorry, that's just as blunt as I can put it. They're loud, they're obnoxious, and they attract big mountain lions to come and hunt. Ooh, that's tasty and it looks sweet, right? So you need many members of your community to provide nurturing from neonate to adult. Biologically, we must have that to reach adulthood. Um, we also have studies that have been done that have proven failure to thrive. They did these studies in the 50s where they put two groups of orphans in two different rooms. One they gave attention and nurturing to, and one they propped up a bottle and changed their butt, and that was it. Never touched them unless they had to. Um, these children died from what they call failure to thrive. These children grew and we're healthy and we're, well, I mean, as healthy as you can be living in an orphanage, and being part of an experiment. um, so when we're looking at this, we see that we have to give nurture to a child to develop their brain so that their brain can develop, and that we must do it on a broader scale than just a singular or just two people. In a community of 30, you're going to have one person who's tending the fire and probably keeping an eye on this toddler running around wherever your guys' home is made. You're going to have probably 10 people out hunting. You're probably going to have roughly the same out gathering. And you're going to have another 5, 6, 7 people who are making things, getting water, stuff like that. Maybe we're cooking food. Maybe we've got a flint knapper going on. Maybe somebody's sewing clothing, right? Yes, I'm keeping an eye, kind of, sort of. So this shows that we are communal. Biologically, we are nurturing. Biologically, we are also communal in the fact that we have what we call mandatory midwifery, which means that we must have somebody help us birth our children because of the way our babies have to turn twice through the birth canal as they're coming out. This means that we biologically need nurture and community to be healthy. Today, we are taught and gaslit that nurture and community is not a need. We don't need that. Let's be anti communal and anti nurturing to everybody around us. And because of this, many of us are dealing with a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety. Many of us are dealing with the feeling that things aren't quite right. And this feeling that things aren't quite right, this depression, this anxiety, these are natural responses to an unnatural and unhealthy society. These are healthy responses to an unhealthy society. Many of us are taught not to give ourselves grace. We're taught to give everybody else grace, but we're taught not to give ourselves grace. And I want to remind you today that you, as a living, breathing human being, deserve, are worthy of grace, empathy, and compassion. And you are deserving and worthy of love. Because these are biological needs, they're things that everybody is worthy of just by being alive. Therefore, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're worthy of grace and love and empathy. So please today give yourself grace and love and empathy. There might not be anybody else doing it, and you deserve it and you're worthy of it. And you are not the problem, you are a part of the solution. It's only when we can see the problem that we can fix the problem. And my personal belief on the fix the problem is land back on a global scale. Returning tending and governance to Indigenous communities on a global scale ensures community ensures change of our environment to a environmental factor that will actually continue our species as a whole growing and developing. Much love to everybody. Take care. I'm going to do my appointment. I'll try and make it back today. If not, I'll be back tomorrow. Have a great one.